to welcome you today for this presentation, which is particularly important to us because of its subject. Indeed, at the origin of this webinar is a common desire to provide as many people as possible the benefits of development prospects and concrete solutions with a view to having a positive impact on our audience and in our industry. So within our two companies, FairlyMade and Eurytech, sustainability is not an empty word. At Eurytech and at FairlyMade as well, we have a deep conviction that our respective solutions are part of a common effort to transform the fashion professions and therefore reduce some environmental issues and costs at our level. So we know that each brand is different and faces different challenges. But we are convinced that without deep knowledge of challenges and of the fashion world itself, technology cannot be a solution or even a help. So Eurytech and FairlyMade are example in themselves, of this marriage between traditional jobs and technology. Digital transformation, an expression so overused nowadays. We practice it on a daily basis within our companies. So we are here today to give you a concrete example of what means integrating technology into your collection process, what it means to forecast with accuracy the behavior of a trend, then to adapt your production and your products, and what it can mean in terms of impact on your environments. We wanted to consider the possibilities available to companies according to their size, their history, their products, and their consumers. I hope you will enjoy this short presentation, and don't hesitate to contact us, if you wish to deep dive a bit into the subject. Today, I will present this webinar with Laure Bech, who is a co-founder of FairlyMade.
Hey.
As well as Amélie Rodsen and Lindsay Baines, both fashion analysts within the Fashion Eurytech team. Here you are. And before beginning concretely the presentation, Laure and I just want to remind you quickly what are Eurytech and FairlyMade. So I start with Eurytech. And then we will concretely go into our subject for sure. So Eurytech was founded in 2013 by two PhD in AI and machine learning. With Eurytech's platforms and consultative approach, fashion brands can clarify their vision of the market via images, analysis, and forecasts. And to do so, we first defined consumers' panels on social media. Then we identify trends with image recognition. With this capability of recognition, we predict the evolution of trends. And you are able to have access to all those insights toward our platform. In doing so, we support fashion players in the digital transformation of their businesses. We want to help reduce overstocks, reassure brands in their creative intuitions, and allow better knowledge of the markets. And therefore, we hope better management of their strategy. So now I leave the stage to Laure to explain more further FairlyMade and the reason to be of FairlyMade. And we will after comment the agenda of today and go into our subjects.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Julie. So hi everyone, I'm Laure and I'm the co-founder of FairlyMade. So for us, everything started in 2018 when with my associate, we were desperately looking for sustainable collections while working in big fashion groups. So we decided to start our journey by going on the ground. And this is actually us that you can see on the picture on the left. And in total, we visited 200 factories. So our first conclusion was that, whoa, it's very complicated to understand the impact of a factory of a garment from our chair in Paris. And there are so many factories implied, so many certification emerging, and social and environmental risk in the industry that as a buyer, we were really lacking solution to concretely understand and progress in our sustainable goals. So this is how our baby born, and with one ambition, improving the social and environmental impact of the fashion industry. So we created the B2B SaaS platform that you can see on the right, supporting brands to understand the impact of their products and find alternatives. So basically, our tool gives you a 360 view of the impact of your products, and we cover compliance of the factory, environmental impact by providing an LCA analysis, traceability of your supply chain, and we give a recyclability grade of your product. So concretely, the platform allows you to track the full journey of your product from the ground to the warehouse, to register all of your suppliers in a one-step solution and to get their compliance score, thanks to dedicated forms adapted to your product and the factory type. Everything on a one secured platform. Then you can also get the environmental grade of your product. Yeah, you were on the right side, Julie. I think this is something that some of you start to see emerging, the little hearth that you can see. So it's what is the French and European regulation is coming. And so also the final goal is to give you a 360 view of your product to take the right decisions. And last but not least, the final module, you can see on next slide, is to communicate also with your final consumer to explain them every effort that you bring on the table, thanks to QR code or widget telling the story of your product.
Thank you, Laura, for this presentation. So now we're going through the agenda of today. So first, we will have a wide definition of sustainability. And then we choose to divide our subjects between what we call brand categorization, means that we wanted to address the subject through different aspects, because we are very conscious that it's not the same issues for a brand the size of Zara or a brand the size of a young designers. So we wanted to deep dive into this subject from this perspective. After we conceived some consumer persona to really allow you to figure who are the people that actually are really interested into sustainability on an aesthetic side and also on a very idealistic side. And on the fourth part, Laura will be able to give you a very strong view of what is fairly made analysis with a concrete example chosen by our team among a lot of trends that we spotted on our sustainability panel. And after all this, we will give you some takeaways to keep in mind and to go through this very big change you might want to initiate in your brand.
So to start with the definition of sustainability, we wanted first to put in light 4 important pillars, which are environmental, social, transparency, and ethical. So first, environmental is everything, you can go to the next slide, everything that is linked to biodiversity. This impact is mainly driven by the localization of the factories you work with and by the material chosen to build a collection. So today we have alternatives for each big categories and trustful certification that we can rely on, that I imagine that some of you may know, like GOTS for the natural material, GRS for recycled material, Ecotext for the, every harmful chemical to avoid them. The second one is the social part. To make garments, we can have until 100 people participating in the process. So causing all the big risks that we know, such as forced labors that we see nowadays with the Uyghur, unpaid workers, unhealthy environment, discrimination. And the best solution to avoid this is to take time to select the right partners by assessing their certification and going to see them meeting the director and workers. And really, I insist on this point. After being on the ground visiting so many factories, it's very important to create this link as a donneur d'ordre. And this is linked to the next criteria, which is transparency in the supply chain. I think that many problems are caused by the fact that brands doesn't really know the entire part of their supply chains. I know it's a huge challenge, but most of the time, tier 2 and 1 are known, but tier 3 and 4, representing spinning, dyeing, raw material, actually hide the biggest social environmental issue. And the last point is the ethical. And by being ethical, we mean it's important to build trust with all your stakeholders. So first, your supplier, by staying committed to the decision that you make, and also with your consumer, making clothes for them to last and give also the transparent communication. We were also feeling that it was important to present the full life cycle of a fashion garment from the ground to the final usage. As you know, every step has their own impact, and also having a sustainable approach is first to do this assessment, to consider all of them, and to look within your own process to monitor your actual issues, to define alternative solutions. So I feel that the real challenge here is to understand what is the most impactful within your own process and collections, to define a roadmap with priorities. And this is where we can help with our solution.
Thank you, Laure. So for our second part of the webinar, we wanted to make an overview of where the industry currently stands. So we decided to divide the market into 4 categories, dividing all the brands that exist within it. So first of all, we have the small, slow fashion, the sustainable giants, the young creators, and other established brands. So we decided to organize these this way because we thought it would be more interesting to do it based on sort of supply chain and production processes rather than perception by consumers, because we really want to focus on the actions that are being carried out within this market. And for each category, we'll go over some initiatives and practices that these companies have implemented, but also limitations that they might be facing in the future. And we'll also address an overarching question that is expressed from more of a consumer point of view. So our first group is the small, slow fashion. So we define this group as being small fashion brands that produce, source, and create sustainably. And this is really the core of their brand identity. And somehow some of these brands may still be unknown to a larger audience, which is also partly interesting in this category. So for initiatives and practices, a lot of these brands make their collections to order and also retain small collection sizes, which really helps them to continue to source sustainable materials, but also have a sustainable production process. A lot of them make timeless pieces that fit multiple occasions, which means that you can buy multiple items over different collections and you'll always feel like you're in the spirit of the brand. And often they also manage to use materials or reuse materials over different collections. And then another good initiative or practice they have is that they produce usually in local workshops, or they provide a really good work environment for their employees. But on the limitation side, we see that there's sometimes a bit of an issue creating desirable products that attract a large customer base. There's also an issue with cost efficiency, which allows the company to take the weight off of the consumer and provide competitive prices. And sometimes due to the small nature of their brand, it might be hard to bring awareness of harmful consumer habits and helping fight overconsumption. So the overarching questions that we asked ourselves from a consumer point of view is, can they be fashionable? And we already see that these brands are providing desirable products to their sustainable customer base who have more of a minimalistic aesthetic and which really fits with their lifestyle. But we're hoping that a lot more consumers will be interested in these brands. So I think we're seeking for them to provide more variety and more options for these consumers in the future. So what's interesting is that we kind of see a shift towards more specialized brands, like specialized in underwear or sportswear, outerwear, shoes. And they are working on a really small scale, But which is interesting is that they have a specialized supply chain. So we're hoping that from their side, it might be easier due to this specialized supply chain to find more internal ways of developing prints or colors or even alternative materials to spice up the collections. So one of the conclusions that we can make for this question is that the offer is definitely growing, but there is a lot more work to be done in terms of like widespread developments and techniques that can be used all over the industry. But what's interesting is that we have some examples of brands here like Viron, Colorful Standard, or even Rupa Pemaraju. And they've all found ways of including sort of these initiatives and finding development and techniques to really create interesting collections. So Viron specifically uses apple leather or even like recycled army tents to make their shoes. Colorful Standard is specialized more in casual wear, but they provide really interesting colorways to really make for an interesting look. And Rupa Pemaraju, her brand goes to India to produce, but they have very specialized workshops there, and they provide really good work conditions for their craftsmen. And for our second group, we will be discussing sustainable giants. So these are huge fashion brands that we know and we respect for their environmental activism, but they also further develop their brand with sustainability at its core, really. So initiatives and practices that we see for these types of companies is that they use social media to promote both good causes as well as their brand, whether it's environmental or really anything humanitarian. They try to really use their platform to reach a large amount of people. They also often provide rental and repair services to their clients, which allows them to keep their clothing for a long time and enjoy them. And then they also invest in secondhand ventures and R&D projects, which hopefully trickle down to the smaller brands in the future. But some limitations on their side is that they might have a hard time enforcing accountability and waste emission reductions along their whole supply chain, as they might not always be producing in the same countries, and thus might have some communication issues or verifying issues. Some of them still kind of use downcycling and synthetic fabrics, even though they can advertise it as being recycling, which is kind of a big problem. And so what we're asking ourselves as the big question is, can they stay true to the ambitious goals that they've set when they have a really large scale production chain and huge demand? So we want the answer to be yes, but I think we've seen a couple of sustainability reports recently that unveiled some more questionable practices with regards to material sourcing or even emission reduction strategies. And it's hard for these brands because they have processes that are tough to eradicate because of the amount of demand and production that they cope with. So one of these examples is the use of polyester, which is made from oil or plastic and is not really fully recyclable, but mostly downcycled, and also releases microplastics into the water stream. So this is a big issue, but it's still used. These sorts of fabrics are still used by many brands on a large scale. And another topic that's worth discussing is emission offsetting. It's a big topic and hard to get into in detail, but what's the problem there is that it might put the blame on other people while it doesn't really help solve the issue at hand within the company itself. That said, there are a lot of giants who are investing in really interesting projects and really trying to make a difference and helping the rest of the industry evolve. So we believe that transparency is really key in trying to keep up. So making sure that your goals are clear and that when something is against you, you stay honest with your consumer pool and make sure that you keep working on progressing on those practices that are tough to eradicate. So a couple of examples here is also Patagonia, who is using their social media to bring awareness about how overconsumption is a big issue, and they're demanding their customers to think about it. Another picture is Stella Run and Adidas. They use plastics, like recycled plastics, into their fabrics, which is interesting, but also sometimes a questionable practice. And then we also have an image here of Reformation and ThreadUp teaming up to provide an opportunity for customers to either sell or recycle their fabrics.
So yes, thank you, Lindsay. So moving on to established brands. So those are defined for us as mainly luxury giants that had initially a sustainable business model due to the quality, rareness, and durability of their products. But we can also extend that to most of the big groups that have signed the fashion pacts, minus of course the fast fashion because of their very special business model. So for years now, those luxury giants have built strong corporate environmental policies to integrate sustainable development in their business plan. And for instance, in 2012, LVMH implemented a roadmap called LIFE for LVMH Initiatives for the Environment. It was revised in 2016 and aimed to achieve environmental excellence by 2020. Some objectives were achieved and some were exceeded, and so it has been pushed with LIFE 360 with 4 new targets, new pillars that are protecting the biodiversity, fighting climate change, and fostering circular economy and transparency. Kering has also published an 8-year program that aims to reduce by 40% their environmental footprint by 2025. So of course, this industry is heavily dependent on raw materials like leather, cotton, precious stones and metals. And for that, Kering, for instance, has launched the Regenerative Fund for Nature with Conservation International and a 5 million grant divided into different initiatives that intend to help drive the transition of 1 million hectares of land to regenerative approaches in luxury supply chains. And finally, they don't work separately, they also work as a whole. So as said in 2019, those big names of the fashion industry have found themselves under the leadership of François Répinaud, CEO of Kering, and mandated by Emmanuel Macron to collectively find actions to implement in order to reduce the ecological impact of the industry. And this pact is based on 3 main axes: climate change, biodiversity, and oceans, and reunites 60 companies representing 200 brands. So for the limitation, the first one is the hyper-industrialization that can offset their sustainable action, since the pace of collection for luxury houses has increased with up to 5 annual collection by gender for some. So it's true that some action can seem sometimes kind of irrelevant with this very, very fast pace of production and therefore wastefulness. Secondly, actions like the Fashion Pact are not necessarily directly binding. So for them, the sanction can only be reputational. And where some objectives are set for 2050 or 2040, or have no limitation at all, which can seem as an heresy given the ecological emergency in which we find ourselves. Also, NGOs were left out during the elaboration of those projects. And finally, they have been called out since the real deep issue is the consumption society that they participate in. If their initiatives are tackling the production chain, our whole consumption should be questioned with all that comes with it. So fast fashion, relocating, and circularity. So for the question that we ask for those big names is, can they turn back? So those actors have a strong history in the fashion industry and are by some means the keepers of know-how. But with time and globalization, they came to industrialize their craft, and inherently somehow they embodied excellence, rareness, and durability, values that should make them sustainable. For instance, brands like Gucci have slowed their collection pace down, going from 5 annual shows to 2, while it was one of Kering's most profitable brands. And the Gucci brand with Burberry are one of the most ambitious brands when it comes to carbon neutrality. On the bottom part, the image on the bottom is one show of Burberry that was carbon neutral 3 years ago. So it's quite of a long time, and they are also continuing to push such practices. They have understood that it was expected of them, and that the political and financial strike force they had compelled them to open their eyes to the challenges of the industry. By funding innovative research through so regenerative farming, circularity, or AI projects. Companies like such contribute to the future of fashion and reaffirm the status as industry leaders. By anticipating the wants of their consumers all over the world through AI, those big houses could concentrate on fostering local know-how. And then our last category of brands are young designers that we define as small independent brands that are usually in the Fashion Week calendars and have at heart or not to run a sustainable business. But we will concentrate on those who will. So designers, for instance, like Kevin Germanier or Suzanne Fong, refuse to use the word sustainable as a trend. Most of them have put at the core of their creative process, recycling or upcycling, fully aware of the challenges it implies. Those young designers are also big on sharing and education, as they know that their discoveries can only help the industry if they are shared. So for instance, Phoebe English, a British designer, has begun a sustainable collective called Fashion on Earth, where she can share the knowledge accumulated and discuss topics like non-recyclable hangers, recycling initiative, and take-back processes for plastic packaging. Of course, they also push innovation. Some like Feng have used it to limit waste and chemical pollution and created a narweave that allows the fabric itself to float between 2- and 3-dimensional realms and can be one size fits all. Wei Lin and Mijia Zhang from PH5 have on their part developed a 3D knitting process that allows a zero waste manufacturing along the use of their dead stock. Concerning the limitation for those brands, relying so much on dead stock and upcycling means that you can find yourself easily on shortcut of raw material when you're scaling up. Also, there's a cash flow complexity since they are small brands and they don't have the financial power that their bigger counterparts may have. Having to pay the suppliers 6 months before your collection hit the stores and you can have a true performance, a true vision of your performance can sometimes be tricky for those type of brands. And also they are overly independent on department stores and concept stores to distribute their collections. Since having your own shop can be quite pricey when you start. So you are dependent on trends and if your brand succeeds at the say department store. And finally, when scaling up, you have to find the right investors. Since when scaling up, a VC firm can help you or also push you to grow at unsustainable rates. So they have to find the right partners and not rush into it. Otherwise, those VC firms can rapidly take over the initial vision. And so for the question that we were asking about those type of brands was, can they scale up? And the question is, can they scale up, but also should they? Profitability is of course possible, but sometimes at a small scale, being surpassed by the will to grow a business with a positive impact. Amongst young designer practices like deck stock, reuse and upcycling are proven to be very popular as a way to not only be an ethical business, but also to be cost effective and to have a strong storytelling and brand identity. But as the brand grows, designers encounter barriers to their original vision. Brands like Marine Serre or Anketal Sarka, like you can see on the bottom, have had their initial vision based on upcycling revamped. Marine Serre now ensures the customers between 30 and 50% of upcycled pieces by collection and complete the rest with recycled fabrics. Relying previously on wholesale, as said, they tend to open a commercial line to sustain the quantity and the upcycle line. Those brands have to materialize two big characteristics of luxury fashion, quality and rareness. And the idea of becoming a global brand can sound to many designers incompatible with their values.
So for our third part of the webinar, we're going to discuss some consumer personas that we have analyzed in the market. So when it comes to sustainability, we believe that consumers are quite ready to make a significant change in their fashion consumption habits. And it's really important to keep track of the latest trends in order to ensure a successful collection, but as well as make sure that your consumer demands and expectations are met. And according to a McKinsey survey from 2020, they said that style, comfort, and quality of items are the most important factors to them at this point, while newness of a style kind of comes in last place. So this is super interesting. And consumers will therefore purchase more durable pieces, do more repairs, and create less waste in this sector. But also millennial and Gen Z consumers show that more than 50% of them have a greater intention to purchase secondhand items and are also more interested in working and purchasing from smaller brands. So after the short introduction, we're going to discuss some hashtags that we've analyzed and also the 3 consumer personas that we've seen by highlighting their driving factors and inspirations. But just interesting to mention is that we decided to keep the focus on women, as we found many more influencers interested in sustainability, and they have many more complex trends that are interesting for them.
Thank you. So to talk rapidly about the hashtags, so we tracked since the beginning of the year some hashtags that were linked to sustainable fashion, upcycling, slow fashion, or vintage fashion. So this gave us this chart, and we can see that the increasing periods for those hashtags are March and April, surely because of the fashion weeks that marks a big momentum for those type of discussion. The most used hashtag are sustainable clothing and conscious fashion, with over 200,000 and 150,000 mentioned since the beginning of the year. And the least used are sustainable fashion brand, a sustainable fashion blogger that is very long and also quite a bit outdated. The best growth has been seen for thriftful hashtags, which is also very popular on TikTok, which we will discuss a bit later, and has a 70% increase between February 2021 and August 2021. And sustainable fashion brand, which even if it was one of the least used hashtag, it still has recorded a 20% increase throughout the year. And finally, the worst one is Depop, which may be because it has momentum at the beginning of the year, and since it's not as well developed on the French market, it has seen its mention going down. On the other hand, the vintage hashtag has maintained itself around like -2% throughout the year. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to dive straight in with the first consumer persona, which is a slow fashion activist. And we can describe these people as being consumers that really pride themselves on purchasing purely slow fashion items, and they don't really focus much on trends. So their wardrobe should be timeless and long lasting, and they really seek out pieces that can stand time, wear, and also are appropriate for different occasions. Their main style identifiers that kind of stand out are neutral tones and natural fabrics, which circle back to the idea that clothing is timeless and suitable for multiple occasions. So their mindset of less is more kind of shows a passion to fight overconsumption and hopefully change the habits of their peers. And on the next slide here, we have analyzed or we have extracted kind of the 5 most important trends that we're seeing among this group. So even though some of these might not be very trendy pieces or fabrics, they were super popular among this group. So we see that they are quite basic trends, very minimalistic, timeless fabrics mostly, and some prints, and also a very simple and neutral color palette. And then we also have a spotlight on a trend, which is checked. This is super interesting that this group was also interested in this trend because it has been very, very popular over the past fashion weeks and seasons. So we can still see that for fall 2021, this is a super important trend. Yeah, we thought it was very interesting to highlight a trend that was popular within this group as well as with the rest of consumers.
So moving on to the next group consumer persona, which is vintage aficionados. So This consumer group consists of big thrifting fans, able to spend hours on secondhand platforms or in physical vintage shops, looking for the right pieces. They often pull inspiration from old imagery in magazines, certain movies, and celebrities from decades ago. Thrifting has for them become the best alternative to fast fashion since it is cost effective and allows them to shop with less guilt. Therefore, their style is easily identifiable as mostly reminiscent of eras like the 70s, 80s, 90s, or more recently Y2K, and proving once again that fashion is an endless beginning. Far from being outdated, their style is prized since it's daring, edgy, and fashionable while not dictated by trends. For instance, the hashtag thrift souls that I was talking a bit earlier, but on Instagram, accounts for 2.7 million views this time on TikTok, and high-end brands have reissued iconic items over the years, like the saddlebag, for instance, or the baguette by Fendi, with the rise of vintage fashion. This has also caused the boom in prices of certain original items on resale platforms. So concerning the trends, we have very 70s inspired trends with ditzy print, wide like formal pants, long sleeve blouses, and Bermudas. So this category, which is interesting, has the most fashion bets, which are wide like formal pants and long sleeve blouse, and the growing tricks. Bermuda is also in rise, but remains a safe bet for those of you who know a bit the way we work out data and our clusters. So this proves the influence of the vintage gamings, even as now. And if you are willing to incorporate those trends into your collection plan, we have on our platform teams like Analog Nostalgia or Preppy Refinement that kind of concentrate all those vintage inspired trends. So the spotlight here is on wide leg formal pants, which for this fall, so for the current collection, we'll see a 15% increase compared to the last trend. You can see on this graph that since 2018, it has kind of kept on growing. So will certainly stay. And so fall will is the high season with a optimal drop season, in September, and is quite thematic toward edgy consumers that still is linked to this vintage style and quite daring spirit. And for our third consumer persona, so the hybrid consumers, which is strongly driven by trends and heavily influenced by popular consumer behavior. They are mostly inspired by fashion shows, popular culture, and social media representation, which means that they will follow popular fashion trends, while they also buy from slow fashion brands and vintage stores, driven by the push of awareness on social media. However, they are also likely to buy fast fashion items if they cannot find an alternative. Thankfully, even if their initial exploration into alternative markets is driven by peer behavior, it can turn into a genuine interest and a growing awareness of their purchasing decisions. So for the trends that concern those hybrid personas, so we have very trendy and seasonal gimmicks that we have seen around a lot lately, as animal prints, spaghetti strap dresses, shank sandals that have been here for two summers now, and graphic prints. We see with those trends more of the ephemeral side, with trends that have declining data, such as chunky slides and graphic prints, which is also a last call. They are more trendy style. If you're willing to dig into what's next for very trendy and visible trends like that, so that will fit this consumer type, you can find on our platforms themes such as Club Kid or Vacation Mode that really embodies those new upcoming trends. And for the trend spotlight, we have spaghetti strap dresses that has seen also like the formal pants an increase, but this time more concentrating on summer and fall seasons since 2018, and is registering a 12% increase for this season. So I'll leave the switch to Laura, which can continue with the alternative analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Amélie. Now I know that I'm in between the slow fashion activist and vintage aficionados, as I just bought a square vintage coat and a white pants. So, yeah, so together we're gonna evaluate one of the trends you just spotted, which is the denim jacket. So we chose to analyze the environmental impact of this denim jacket with three different variables that we see together. First, it will be conventional cotton and the production in Asia. Then we will switch to organic cotton and considering a GOT supply chain also in Asia, to finalize with organic cotton with GOT supply chain, but in Europe. So the idea is to show you the impact that we can save by changing these variables. This will be possible thanks to a life cycle analysis based for two different data sources. And so for those who don't know, the life cycle analysis is a tool to figure out the impact of a particular product on the environment. So we will do a cradle to gate analysis, meaning that all of the steps that you can see on the screen will be taken in account from the ground to the warehouse of the brand before it's transported to the final consumer. So to make this analysis, we have taken some assumptions, which is first the product weight of our denim jacket, which is 900 grams. And the fact that we have applied a chemical fading on the denim to look a bit oldie. And the transport that we have been used is always truck or boat. So these impact indicators that we have selected are the ones recommended by the European Commission, especially the PEF, the Product Environmental Footprint Working Group, and the French Environmental Labeling Project, which is Affichage Environnemental, as some of you may know. So we have selected three main indicators, which is first the climate change. So it's the CO2 equivalent. I imagine many of you know, but this indicator translates the global warming caused by greenhouse gases. Then a more complicated one, the freshwater eutrophication, which is phosphorus equivalent. In a few words, it's water pollution and it's causing imbalance in aquatic environment. And the final one is the energy resource. And this indicator represents primary energy consumption from non-renewable sources, such as oil, natural gas. So the first option that we can see here together is the one made out of conventional cotton produced in Asia. So actually the raw material is coming from India and we consider a supply chain in China. So for one jacket produced, we have almost 30 kilos of CO2 corresponding to 300 kilometers by car for one passenger. Almost 20 GP of water eutrophication, which is the equivalent of 190 kilo of agua, and 400 mg of energy resource, which is the equivalent of 130 hours of eating a flat. So all of this seems to be a lot for one product. So let's see together how the improvement can be made by changing the variables. So here we decided to evaluate the impact of the same jacket, but made with organic cotton and with a more environmental friendly Asian supply chain. We have considered that this supply chain was GOT certified. So as you can see, all the indicators are improved. For CO2 and energy, we roughly save 11%. It's better thanks to the factories that we have selected here. We considered, as we said, that there were GOTS supply chain, meaning that they have been audited on environmental criteria. But still, this improvement stays small as Asia has a very polluting energy mix, hard to improve. Here, what is changing the most is freshwater eutrophication, the water pollution, which is cut by half, showing that organic agriculture and water treatment technologies are having a significant positive impact on this data. And finally, we decided to evaluate the impact of the same jacket made with organic Turkish cotton and with European gut supply chains. So we still compare it to the first option, which were the conventional cotton in China. And here you can see that all the indicators are way better. We have the fresh eutrophication, the water pollution, which is drastically improved, reflecting the fact that European agriculture is way more efficient. And we can see energy use and CO2 improved thanks to the energy mix of Europe, which is way better. Indeed, we have really less coal in Europe compared to Asia. And finally, we wanted to present you a chart where we can see the repartition of the impact within the full production process to see where is the impact. And this graph is corresponding to the first option, the conventional cotton in Asia. So you can see that yarn production and dyeing cause most of the impacts, that the freshwater eutrophication is driven by the conventional cotton yarn, and that weaving, denim, fading, laundry cause roughly 35% of the energy use and CO2 emission. Then we go to the virtuous version, the last one of the organic cotton with European supply chain. First, just a clarification, you can see that the width of the bar is the same, but the total amount of impacts are way lower, as we have seen before. So the idea here is to see what are the impacts that we have left. And you can see that yarn production is no longer significant in the energy use and CO2 emission, and that dyeing and fading takes more weight here. So to lower it, we could now source new options, less polluting, for instance, to replace the denim chemical fading that we have been considered with laser meshing, for instance. So the role of this graph is really to understand, to highlight where to focus and how to start with your sustainability journeys and to define your priorities. So this was all about environmental impact for today, but also our role is to say that we should not forget about the social impact in the supply chains. As a brand, you really have a role to play to drive factories, to be more transparent, to try to know all of them and to visit them. I imagine that this may seem big for you, but you can see that really concrete action, as we have mentioned, like just changing a material or changing the supply chains can lead to real change in the impact. So we really encourage you to question your actual process, the material you use to progress within your sustainability journey. And that's really what we can help you with thanks to our tool. And I will finish by the presentation by just showing to you how it looks on the platform. So this is an idea of how it looks, how it will look. So the idea is really to have the detail of your product to understand where are the impacts to find solutions. So I invite you to follow us on Instagram. And if you want to get in touch with us to have a proper demo, you can scan this code and we will get back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laure. So I will go over some of the key takeaways as well over the whole presentation, obviously. So we want to show you again how you can materialize your commitments to sustainability fully. So by setting your goals based on the pillars that Laure defined in the first part, you can create actionable next steps. And defining what your brand category is and which one you fit closest to, you can find the practices and limitations that are inherent to your business model, so you can also take concrete action further. And for the third takeaway, we think that you should be identifying your persona that fits with your target market, but also your sustainable values so that you can incorporate their preferences in your brand DNA. And lastly, we We hope that you can optimize your collection development through targeted trend analysis, responsible material sourcing, and also responsible production planning through trend analysis and obviously alternatives analysis as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to reply to you by email. So do not hesitate to contact us at Huratech or at Fairly Made for any further questions. You have our email addresses here. Thank you again and have a great day.